Before I start, I just want to give a warning to everybody that the story I'm about to talk about contains these topics that you see on screen, so just be warned. Welcome to my complete guide to Project DO2. This video is for anyone who wants to watch me go through the slideshows and listen to my commentary as I explain in more detail about the scenes so that you guys can understand the setting and the characters more, since I can't really explain everything I want to in bullet points. But yeah, don't worry, you'll understand. And I'm gonna give you guys some insider information on the story. So I'm gonna introduce the main characters first. So first up, we have Tatsuo, my boy Tatsuo. He's 38 years old, and he's a mathematician. And he used to work as a data analyst, but now he's working as a math tutor. Talk about downgrade, but it's okay. He loves his job. As you can see, it's in his likes. He loves his job. But anyways, he was born in Japan, but he grew up in the United States. And then I don't know, that's really it. I really don't have to say anything else because everything you find out about him is in the story. But anyways, so Yaiko, his wife, she's 36, and she's a fashion designer. She works from home, and she's also from Japan, but she was raised in Japan until she was a teenager, and then she moved to the United States. But anyways, yeah, she works from home, and she designs clothes, and then she sells them overseas to smaller businesses in Japan. But honestly, she appears really well put together. I guess all you need to know about her is that she appears to be a very well put together woman, but she's actually pretty toxic, guys. And then finally, our final main character, everyone's fan favorite, Eric Moon. Gotta love him. 18-year-old, just graduated high school, a few weeks before the story is set to take place. So he's really interested in anything that has to do with science, and during the story he does get a job as a chemistry teacher's assistant, woohoo! Awesome. Okay, so I'm actually going to show you some background characters also. They're only really relevant in the prologue and the epilogue, and otherwise they're just kind of mentioned in the story very, very briefly. They're so unimportant to the main story, but yeah. Oh, and I also added a little height chart in the middle for the main cast in case you're curious, because my old one is outdated in both terms of design and heights. But anyways, first up, I'm gonna talk about Eric's family. So his mom is a runaway spouse, and she kind of packed up and left when Eric was young because she had enough of her husband's abuse, and she was a decent mom to Eric, but she still left him behind because she didn't want responsibility for him when she started her new life, and he also looked too much like his dad, and she did not want him to be a walking constant reminder, even though he didn't act like him. But anyways, Eric doesn't really remember his mom, his biological mom, that much, but the memories that he does have of her, they're all good. He doesn't have any bad memories with her other than the fact that she straight up abandoned him, which does leave him with abandonment issues, and he does tend to get attached to older women. And when I say that, I mean his teachers, in elementary school and middle school. He just seems to gravitate towards more motherly figures, I suppose. I'm gonna jump around the slide, and we're gonna talk about Eric's quote-unquote stepmom now, and I say it like that because she never married Eric's dad, but they were dating for a while. So after Eric's mom leaves, she kind of comes in a little while later into the story, and she actually introduces Eric's dad to hard drugs, and they start abusing substances together, and that leaves Eric unsupervised for a long time when he's in his later childhood, into his teenage years, before he can properly become independent. So he does have to kind of grow up a little bit quick, but we'll talk more about that later. His stepmom is also not the worst person ever, and Eric also remembers her as a pretty decent girl when she was sober and able to function. And last but not least, for Eric's family at least, we have his dad, who was not inherently a violent man, but he was abusive to both of his partners, and sometimes Eric, but not physically, when he was intoxicated. But when he was sober and before he started getting addicted to alcohol and drugs, he was a very pleasant guy. He just kind of went downhill. But yeah, he's never hit Eric, but he has thrown things and verbally and emotionally abused him. And Eric doesn't hate his dad, and he actually before his dad started drinking more frequently, him and Eric were super duper close, and they got along really well. He actually worries about his dad more than anything. And Eric also avoids drinking alcohol because of him, because he saw how his dad turned out and uses it as an example of what not to do. And when he does think of his dad, he tries to only think of good memories. Obviously he has a lot of bad memories also, because if anyone ever asks about his dad, he is sure to say positive things, not negative. So the last set of background characters I need to talk about are Yaiko's family. So a little bit of background on Yaiko. She was born and raised in Japan until she was about 16, and then she moved to the United States to study abroad for high school and then college. So all of her family and close friends live in Japan, and the only people that they have contact with in the States are Yaiko and Tatsuo, purely because they don't know anyone else overseas, because she was the first in her family to travel away from Japan. So she isn't really close to her family though, but they do check on her every now and then to just ask how she is doing, They haven't seen her in a while. She doesn't ever go back to visit, and she doesn't ever invite them over. So that's all for the characters, so we can now move on to the prologue. And we're gonna start by going to like before Eric was even born, and we're gonna talk about how Tatsuo and Eric's dad met. They met in college, and they were roommates the first year, and they just hit it off right away, and they became best friends, and they took classes together, and they joined the same clubs, and they had the same friends, and everything was good. And when Eric was born, Tatsuo and Mr. Moon, which is I refer to Eric's dad as like Mr. Moon interchangeably, they kind of drifted apart, and this was partly due to Tatsuo moving away, but also because it was around the time when Eric's dad began developing his addiction to alcohol. Tatsuo's attempts to talk to him and continue their friendship were pretty unsuccessful. Once Eric's mom leaves, Mr. Moon legally divorces her, and then that's when he starts dating the younger lady who introduces him to hard drugs like ketamine and like other psychedelic dissociative drugs, and that leaves Eric unsupervised for long periods of time in late childhood, early teenage years. He has to learn how to become pretty independent and quote-unquote mature at a young age. However, he is really just a troubled teenager who's struggling a lot to regulate his emotions and stuff. And I will mention that on top of all of this, he does have undiagnosed autism, and the symptoms related to that worsen as his stress and anxiety gradually increased over the years. But surprisingly, he did have a very good school life. It was very positive, and he had a lot of good friends from the clubs he was in, and he really liked the supportive community that he had, so he really enjoyed school, and this was like a good enough system. He had a good enough system going that despite the situation at home, he could keep going. But eventually, Mr. Moon's girlfriend breaks up with him, and he starts to deteriorate quicker than he was before, even losing his job for showing up drunk one day. And what causes him to pick his life back up is a near-death experience where he like almost ODs, and Eric is the one who found him and had to like get him to the ER. It was like sort of like a wake-up call to see how much like his son was still like caring for him and like there for him despite like the horrible conditions he had put him through and like all of his actions. So it made him like want to make a change. Before he gets sent to rehab, he finally gives Tatsuo a call and asks him for like this huge favor, and he wants him to like allow Eric to live with him and like teach him the important life skills and like help him get a good job and just like support him the way that he deserves and like how a dad should properly do it. And Tatsuo, being the nicest guy, says yes, and that's where it starts. But we need to talk a little bit about the Kimuras as well. So what's happening with them during all this time? You know, they get married sort of late, I feel like late 20s maybe. But Yaiko promised Tatsuo that once they got married and settled down that they would have kids because he's always wanted to start a family. It's been a dream of his, and he really wants to start a family with her. However, she doesn't go through with this, and she acts like completely selfish with like the whole situation and refuses to consider Tatsuo's concerns or feelings about their relationship like in general. Like she just does not listen to him when he tries to communicate. She like uses him, and like he's like a disposable thing to her. He's a really big pushover. One of her favorite manipulation tactics is she likes to like ignore him, just like, completely ignore him whenever he tries to voice his opinions or his feelings or issues that he has with how she treats him, which sucks for him because he feels unheard. But eventually, about like 6 months before the story is set to take place, she starts to cheat on him and like hooks up with guys at bars because he started to stand up for himself and wasn't as easy for her to manipulate. So that's it. That's the prologue. So now we can get into the main story, and there's 5 main scenes and then an epilogue. So that's what you're getting into right now. Okay, so now we can get into the main story. And when Tatsuo opens the door, he calls Eric by his middle name, which is Minsu. And a little background to this: Eric is Korean American, and when he was younger, his dad spoke to him only in Korean exclusively, and he referred to him by his middle name. And his mom, who's not Korean, spoke to him in English. But when Eric started public school, he started going by his first name more often, and then his dad also just gradually stopped speaking to him in Korean, and he still referred to him as Minsu until he started his addiction, where he just gradually started to call him Eric. And then when Tatsuo got the call from Eric's dad, he was kind of like shocked that his dad was referring to him as Eric. But he doesn't really like ask about it, but he still calls Eric that because that's what he remembers Eric as. So Tatsuo explains to Eric that Yaiko is out running errands and that she would be back with dinner later. Go and like take a walk because Tatsuo wants to go take him to the beach and like catch up with him and just like get caught up on what's been happening. And guys, I want to tell you, Eric loves the beach. This is like love at first sight for him. He's never ever been to the beach before, and he was like really skeptical about like how he'd feel about like the sand and everything, but he loves it and it's great. So then when they're actually at the beach and they're just talking, having like a chat, and walk in. And Eric fills in Tatsuo about like everything from his mom's disappearance to like his dad's addiction, like goes into detail about everything. And Tatsuo asks about like what Eric's interested in, like what he does for hobbies and things and what he's been doing his whole life. And Eric talks about how he's really into anything that has to do with science, and that he was in like a bunch of science clubs all throughout middle and high school to like keep him occupied, because he has like a natural talent when it comes to the subject, specifically in like areas like physics and chemistry where it has to do with like numbers and equations. But he like dabbles in robotics and astronomy as well, because he's just interested in anything that has to do with science. So that's his specialty. Or Tatsuo tries to bond with Eric by like trying to relate to him as much as possible, because he is like really into math, and he was in like math clubs and math competitions and all that stuff. So it was like similar to Eric when he would be like competing in like science like club event things, experiment shows, stuff like that. So they have like a little bonding moment, and it's just like this cute moment for Tatsuo to see how Eric grew up and like hear his struggles and find out what he's been like dealing with this whole time. And when they get home, Yaeko is there with dinner, and Tatsuo introduces her to Eric, and they just, you know, have dinner together, talk. Yae talks about her job and how she works from home overseas with her fashion business, and it just kind of, this first scene is just an introduction to all of the characters, you know? So scene 2 happens to take place on Yaeko's birthday 3 weeks later from the start of the story, and during this time, Eric is just living life after graduation, going to the beach, hanging out, reading, going on runs and working out. Because another thing he did a lot in school was weight training electives, and he was a part of a cross-country club, just because he used that as like a way to keep himself occupied and like away from home as much as possible. And I already mentioned this, but Yaeko works from home as a fashion designer and sells her designs to small businesses in Japan. And when Eric is not at the beach reading or working out, he's usually at home helping her with chores around the house, and they get to know each other better this way. And Yae is like very caring and almost motherly to him during this time. And Tatsuo is working as a tutor at this learning center that he works for that's just completely separate. Like think of like a Kumon or like mathnasium kind of thing. He works the summer school program as well at the local high school teaching the math class. And he's been doing this for a couple of years, just like trying to save up some more money. And parents don't really pay for tutoring that much during the summer, so he has a lot more free time to just teach classes and also, you know, tutor whatever kids he still needs to tutor. So Tatsuo comes home pretty late on Yae's birthday while her and Eric are making dinner together, and when they all sit down to eat, Yae suggests that they all have a beer to celebrate, and she offers Eric one as well. And Eric is obviously a little bit skeptical because he's never had alcohol before, because he's sort of like unofficially sworn off drinking. Okay, editing, we're kind of here to clear this up. I think I mentioned it before, but the reason he unofficially swears off drinking is because he saw how his dad ended up and didn't want to end up like him. So that's why he avoided alcohol. So he's like hesitant, but because Yaeko's insisting that because it's her birthday, she wants all of them to drink together, and he doesn't like want to disappoint her, so he agrees. And during the dinner, Tatsuo offers to put in a good recommendation at the learning center if Eric is ever interested in getting a job in the science department there. And Eric tells him that he had been considering looking for a job soon anyways. He doesn't think it's a bad idea because he talks about how he used to work in a lab as an assistant during the summers, so he has a little bit of experience. So after dinner, they all play cards on the couch, and Eric accepts another beer because Yaeko's like, let's just have one more while we play cards. You know, he's feeling good at this moment. He's like, okay, maybe being drunk isn't so bad. And after they play cards for like an hour, like a couple minutes, just, you know, chatting, maybe watching TV, it's around like 10 p.m. Tatsuo makes a harmless comment. He's like, oh wow, it's like so late already, and I still have so much stuff to like work to grade. And Yae takes this as like him complaining and mentions how he's always working late and how he never gets anything done, which like prompts this little argument between them that ends in Tatsuo like shutting himself in his office for the rest of the night. And once he's gone, Yae offers Eric some more alcohol. This time it's peach sake. And by this point, Eric is feeling like sluggish already, and he like tries to refuse. He's like, oh, like I'm already like too drunk, so like I'll pass. But she's like, come on, just like do it. And he gives in, and she teaches him how to drink it, like the proper method of like pouring it. And he doesn't like it, but they talk for like maybe 15 minutes, but Eric really doesn't feel good anymore, so he's like, I'm gonna go to bed. Good night. Sorry, I would offer to help you clean the kitchen, but like I just really don't feel good. So he goes off to bed. So she cleans up, and then when she goes upstairs, she notices that Eric left his bedroom door wide open, and he had fallen asleep in his jeans and his shirt, like how he was dressed for dinner. So he clearly just like passed out. Like he went into his room and he just passed out. You know, it's implied that he passed out drunk. So Hiii, being the evil woman that she is, uses this as an opportunity to make out with him while he's unconscious, and she assaults him by putting his hand underneath her dress and climbing on top of her. And when she's, you know, done and satisfied, she just leaves like nothing happened. And in the morning, Eric has a hangover, but he doesn't remember the assault at all. He doesn't even like remember the conversation after Tatsuo left. That's just to like put into perspective how wasted he was. Okay, so scene 3 takes place about a month later after Yago's birthday. Eric got the job as a chem assistant for the learning center during summer school, and so Eric and Tatsuo start carpooling to work together, and they have lunch together all the time, and they kind of create this father-son kind of bond. And Tatsuo is so happy because he finally gets to live his dream of being a father through Eric, regardless of how old he is, because, you know, Eric is still a boy who needs a lot of guidance, and Tatsuo just loves to help him out, okay? Eric, of course, is so grateful for Tatsuo's generosity. He also sees Tatsuo as like a responsible father figure that he didn't have growing up to, so he can like actually look up to someone as a role model now rather than his dad back at home. And they have this relationship that they have is like so special, okay? And they get along so well. And this is also why Eric doesn't really have a problem with Tatsuo calling him Minsu, because it reminds him of when he was younger and his dad would talk to him when he was sober, obviously. Eric was also getting close to Yaiko around this time, but in different ways, because she stopped acting as like motherly and caring. Now she was being more flirtatious with him, and she always let Eric talk to her about his interests and listen very intently, which made him feel heard and validated. And she was always showering him with praise and compliments and just like love bombing him. And like when I say that she listens about his interests and listens to him talk, it's not to say that Tatsuo doesn't, it's just that he's been keeping himself so busy trying to avoid his marriage with like work. He's trying to keep himself busy with work to avoid his crumbling marriage, that he just doesn't have a lot of time to talk to Eric outside of breaks at work or at dinner. During Eric's free time, he's usually talking to Yaiko. But I will mention that Eric does talk to people his age, like who are also volunteering at like the school or also teacher's assistants. So he's talking to people his age as well, and he's making friends. And like I mentioned earlier, he ends up developing this kind of attachment to Yaiko where he really, really trusts her. And one of the reasons is because she is a similar age as to what his mom would have been if he knew her around this time. During the past month, Tatsuo starts to catch on to Yai's strange behaviors and like how she would disappear in the middle of the night for hours and like come back like nothing ever happened. Now Tatsuo's like has his suspicions, but instead of like confronting her about this, he stays quiet and he like channels his anger into his job, which is why he's spending excessive amounts of time planning these lessons and going to the learning center to grade papers instead of going home. Twice Tatsuo has caught Yaiko gone in the middle of the night, and he stayed awake to kind of wait and see if she would, like when she would return home, and when she would come home, she would go take a shower and then go back to sleep like nothing ever happened. That was what caused the suspicion. So on the night of July 15th, Yaiko tries to initiate sex with Tatsuo for the first time in 6 months since, or I guess now it would have been 7 months since they've had a dead bedroom. And Tatsuo is just completely uninterested, and he tells her that he doesn't want anything to do with that, but she's stubborn and he has to like physically remove her hands from him, which she doesn't take very well. And that's the last time she even attempts to quote unquote fix their relationship, because in reality she doesn't really want to fix anything. She just wants him to go back to being easily manipulated and like a total pushover, but that's not gonna happen, so she's gonna move on essentially now. So the next morning after that night, when the two boys are at work, Hiii uses the computer in Tatsuo's office to respond to her business emails and order more supplies for her fashion business. And at the same time, she goes on sketchy websites and online forums that she usually frequents. She plans these hookups that she's having when she's disappearing in the middle of the night. Or I think it's worth noting that Tatsuo has caught her browsing these sites before because she forgot to clear the history on the computer, and it's the one that they share. While scrolling on one of these sites this time, she finds an ad for this aphrodisiac, and it's supposedly illegal because the effects are extremely, extremely strong, and it's not like any other drug on the market. One of the effects besides a raised libido is extreme sensitivity to touch. So when she finds this out, she decides she has an idea. So that same week on Friday, the three of them decide to go out to a restaurant to eat together for the first time, because they mainly eat at home, and if they do decide to eat out, they usually just like do takeout. But at the restaurant, Tatsuo gets like way too drunk because he had like a super stressful week. So Hiii and Eric have to help him back inside and like have to like help him walk back inside. And they lay him on the couch, and Yaiko pretends to be concerned a bit before she's like, "Hey Eric, like I know you couldn't drink at the restaurant because you're underage, but do you want a beer now since we're here home and we can just sit and chat a bit before bed?" And Eric's like, "Sure, why not?" Because you know he's learned to better control himself the past month because he dabbled a bit, and you know it's gonna be the weekend, so what's the harm in just one drink? Wait, okay, I need to like actually get back on track. Okay, we're supposed to be on this slide. Ooh, but Hiii spikes his drink drink with that aphrodisiac, and she gives it to him, and he drinks almost the entire glass all at once, and she's like, oh crap, I hope he doesn't like die, because I don't know what the effects of this are. I didn't expect him to drink it all at once. But she just kind of sits with him and asks him how his day was at work, and like 15 minutes later, he starts shifting uncomfortably and rocking himself like back and forth, like more than he usually does, because something that he does is just, he likes to like rock his upper body like back and forth, like when he's sitting in like a chair or something, like when he's talking to people or like watching TV. It's just like something he does like idly. He doesn't even like notice he does it, but he's like doing it more than usual, that like to the point that it's like noticeable. He keeps like adjusting the collar of his shirt like it's like too tight, and Hiii asks him like if he's okay, and he says he's fine, but he like suddenly feels like feverish, like he's like really hot and like he's sick, and he just can't seem to get like comfortable. And she like watches him for a while, and he like puts his head down, and like it's kind of silent. It's like weird, awkward tension. She reaches her hand out to like, while his head is down, she tries to like feel his temperature on his forehead, and this is like a sensory nightmare for Eric, because not only did he have any time to react, because since his head was down, he couldn't see that she was going to like reaching out to grab him, so he had no warning. The drugs were like making him extremely sensitive to touch, so he freaks out a bit, and like he doesn't like scream, but he like makes a noise, and he like covers his mouth. So then Hiii comes up behind him, like she gets up and she comes up behind him, and she like hugs him and like holds him in place. The drug works as like a relaxer on top of everything, so on top of being overwhelmed, he's like, his body's super heavy and he can't really push her off of him, causing him to panic a bit. But eventually he starts calming down, like giving into her, and she drinks the rest of his beer and she kisses him, and that's when Tatsuo starts to wake up because they're making too much noise now. So they go to his office and they have sex, and during that time she starts to confess, quote unquote, her like love to Eric, even though she doesn't actually love him. She's just kind of messing with his head, and this makes Eric super guilty because, you know, Tatsuo and him, just a very emotionally intense scene for him. But at the same time, he low-key kind of has, like, he thinks he has these feelings for Hiii, and I mean, maybe he does, but like, she's being manipulative, okay? Oh, scene 4. So more weeks have passed, guys. More weeks have passed between these scenes. Tatsuo wakes up one morning and everything is normal, and he goes to his closet to get dressed for the day, and he finds a shirt that's not his, and he thinks it might be Eric's because it's a size too small. So he goes downstairs and asks Hiii if she had been doing Eric's laundry, because how else would one of his shirts end up in her closet, because she does laundry since she's home all day. And she gets really defensive at first, and she tries to make up like these excuses as to how Eric's shirt might have ended up in his pile of laundry. But Tatsuo's not really buying it, but he's also like fed up with her and her bullshit, so he just kind of ignores it. He's like, okay, whatever. So later, like Yaiko was making breakfast downstairs. Eric comes down for breakfast, and he has a pretty like big visible hickey on his neck, and Tatsuo points it out. And I think it's like worth mentioning that him and Yaiko have been, it's an active affair now. Like they've just kind of been like hooking up whenever Tatsuo is not around, and kind of getting into these like risky situations, like when he's in his office and stuff. Again, I don't know how I missed this in the initial recording, but one time Yaiko actually gives Eric acid. I don't know why I completely like this blank from my mind, but she like literally tries to introduce him to drugs again. After she drugged him the first time, I mean, she gets him to take acid, so I think it's important to mention all the things that she did. And Eric is pretty against it. Like, of course, he like has feelings for her and all, but he is like really trying to like get her to not, but she's not really like listening to him. And Eric also doesn't really have a backbone, but you know, he's also kind of in love with her. Tatsuo points out the hickey on Eric's neck, and he goes pale, like he got caught, and Tatsuo's like, no, like, don't apologize, it's okay, but it's really unprofessional to show up to your job at a school with a hickey, so just be more careful, and you should probably wear a shirt that covers it more. So Eric goes and changes his shirt. Tatsuo's like confused because he hasn't heard any news of like Eric having a girlfriend or anything, because he assumed that he would have heard something about that, and he thought Eric would have told him, and he was thinking like, oh, maybe he's going out with a girl that he met volunteering, because he's been volunteering at the summer science camps in the area during his free time. But Tatsuo didn't bother asking him about it because, you know, he assumed Eric wasn't telling him for a reason, and he probably just wanted to keep it to himself. And Tatsuo was just happy that Eric was adjusting to this new lifestyle well, and he seemed to be happy. And after that same day, Tatsuo stays behind to get some more work done as per usual, and Eric went home alone that day, and immediately upon walking through the front door, Hiii throws herself at him and kisses him, and he tries to push her off so that they can just talk, because he wants to have a conversation about what happened this morning and getting caught, and he wants to talk about his guilt and just tell her like, I feel like we shouldn't be doing this anymore. It's been a few weeks, like, I do like you, but if you're gonna stay with him, I can't do this, and the guilt is eating him alive, basically. And she ignores him, doesn't listen, and is like, and he is like begging her, like, please listen to what I'm saying. If you're gonna divorce him, and like, she is saying that she's happier with Eric, and starts throwing around that Tatsuo is not really like being affectionate anymore, but it's hard to talk to him about it, and just like, but yeah, that's how that scene ends. Guys, for scene 5, please bear with me. It It's kind of crazy. Just bear with me. It's a lot. So it's early August now. It's the last day of summer school, and Eric stayed behind after work for a party that his class was hosting, and he said that he would help facilitate or help supervise and clean up afterwards. So Tatsuo went to work earlier to clear out his classroom since it was last day. When he returned home without Eric, he felt like taking a nap because last days with the students always made him feel depressed. And Hiii was doing laundry in the living room when he got home, and they ignored each other, and Tatsuo just went up to their room because by that point there's just so much tension, they're like actively avoiding each other. And when Tatsuo goes to the bathroom in his bedroom, because they have the master bedroom, he finds Eric and Hiii's clothes all over the floor, and he's super confused, and he walks back around to the bed. On Hiii's side of the bed, on her nightstand, he finds an empty condom wrapper, and he puts two and two together, and he remembers the Hiii from like a couple weeks ago and the misplaced shirt from a couple weeks ago. Everything's clicking. He's so filled with rage. It's like unexplainable how angry he is. Like, he's kind of sitting there for a moment, kind of digesting everything, and like okay, she's cheating on me with other people besides Eric, and she's just like a horrible wife. She's not how I remember her at all. He's just mad at himself, mad at her. So he goes downstairs. He runs downstairs to confront her. He shows her the like open wrapper, and she immediately starts getting defensive and tries to blame Eric and like saying he was blackmailing her or like threatening her. But Tatsuo calls her on her bullshit because he brings up the online forums that he saw once or twice, and the 2 times that she disappeared for a couple hours in the middle of the night. And then she tries shifting the blame onto Tatsuo again, like she did with Eric, saying that he's starving her of attention, tries to play the victim. And that's when he opens up about how she made him feel all those years. And you know, she's kind of sitting there like she can't really say anything because everything that he's saying is true because she's evil. At the end, because she got caught, she's like, okay, well, basically laughs in his face and says, well, it was your fault for making it too easy to step on you, and calls him pathetic. And she tries to leave. She tries to walk away from the situation, and if she did, she would have like grabbed her purse and just left. But instead, when she tries to walk away, Tatsuo shoves her, and she hits her head on the corner of the table behind her, and it almost knocks her out, and she falls to the ground. And Tatsuo gets on top of her and just starts blowing punches to her face and starts to strangle her. And she's trying to fight back, but the blow to her head kind of put her on the edge of consciousness, so she's not doing too good. So she gets one good hit like to his nose, and it breaks his glasses off of his face, and now his vision is extremely impaired. So he starts to panic, and in his panic, he grabs the nearest thing to him, which is a lamp, and he just beats her head into the floor. Yeah, it's just like a really gory, rage-filled scene, like spur of the moment kind of mania that he's in. And once he snaps out of it and he realizes what he's done, and he has to go find his glasses near the corpse, he vomits and tries to decide what he's gonna do. And while he's washing off the blood in the kitchen off of his hands and fixing his glasses, like taping them back together, Eric coincidentally comes home and immediately upon walking through the front door sees the scene before him, and he screams and throws up, understandably. And Tatsuo tries calming him down, but he's still covered in blood, so obviously Eric knows what happens, and Eric threatens to call the cops and run away, and which causes Tatsuo to grab his arm, makes Eric freak out even more because like he thinks he's next, because Tatsuo says, hey, I know about the affair. So he's like, oh my god, he's gonna kill me next. But Tatsuo's like, no, don't worry, I'm not mad at you. Tatsuo tries to explain that Hiii tried to throw Eric under the bus as well, and that he was manipulated just like Tatsuo was. So they're both in the same boat basically. And Eric breaks down like apologizing, like, oh my god, you're too nice to me, but like also what the hell is going on next to him? Like, he's scared also, so he's crying because he feels guilty and he's scared, and like the whole situation is just bad. And Tatsuo apologizes to him for not noticing what was happening with his wife sooner. The epilogue, where Eric agrees to cover up the murder with him, and they just continue to live life as normal afterwards. Tatsuo impersonates Hiii through her emails and resigns from her business deals. And a couple months after, her family reaches out to Tatsuo asking about her because they haven't heard from her in a while, and Tatsuo pretends to be shocked that she hasn't reached out and told them about their quote-unquote divorce, and he lies, saying that, you know, they had been having like a rough relationship the past couple years and things just ended messy and they haven't been in contact. And Hiii's family tells him like, oh, like we knew that the marriage was struggling because she had mentioned it before, but I didn't think it ended like that, and she hasn't talked to us, so if you hear from her, let us know. They're a little bit suspicious. They're kind of suspicious of Tatsuo, but not really, because they think maybe like, oh, the marriage was bad, maybe he was the one doing something, but they don't know his side of the story. Obviously they're gonna side with Yaiko because they're her family, but there's not really much they can do to contact US authorities because it's pretty difficult for them to open up a missing persons case overseas like that. So they kind of just assumed, like they took Tatsuo's word and just gave up. And like I mentioned before, she always had like a somewhat strange relationship with her family and always isolated herself from them for some reason, so it wasn't uncommon for her to go silent for long periods of time, but this time it had just been too long, right, that they got concerned, which rightfully so. Okay, and with that is the end of the story. First of all, how'd you guys enjoy the story? I don't really know. Well, I guess that's what my final comments are for. So I guess the moral of the story is that if you turn your back on things that like require your attention and try to avoid them, you risk like affecting the people around you as well. Like how Tatsuo knew his wife was like this narcissistic, manipulative woman and allowed a very vulnerable 18-year-old boy who he was supposed to be protecting be around her, didn't really notice the creepy signs, and, you know, ended up kind of making him rage a bit because his mental health was deteriorating being with her, which caused, you know, everything. So basically just cut the people who you are bringing you down out of your life, guys. But I do think eventually, years later, they would get caught, and it would, like, the story would make headlines, I think, in my little universe. When I decided to change the ending to have him kill his wife, I was like, like maybe eventually it'll come up and headline and I can make like a cool like Easter egg, but it's just supposed to be like a complete one short story. It originally started as a Camp NaNoWriMo project that didn't end up getting finished in time, so I also want to mention that the ending scene, while it's supposed to be sort of like heartwarming between Tatsuo and Eric, it's also not completely like happy. Like, you're not supposed to be on Tatsuo's side completely for murdering her and then convincing Eric to help you cover up the murder. So Tatsuo definitely has his faults because Eric is in his best interest regardless, even if he has to do a little bit of like string pulling to get him to do what he wants. It is supposed to be a different point of view in my ongoing universe where I touch on like different topics of like sexual trauma and like how it affects the different people involved and those around them. And I guess my final comment is RIP Yaiko, you would have loved Shiny Bro. She would have been, or Jonghyun Sedan. That's my headcanon, except it's canon because if she were alive, she probably would have liked them. But yeah, oh my gosh, wow, I cannot believe I did this. It took me a long time to make this and then also come up with like the script, and now I'm gonna have to edit all this together, so. Oh yes, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I can't wait to like talk and maybe answer more questions about the characters. Because I really, really like them.